Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another week in Clown World. Hope this finds you all well, wherever you are. Hi, Leslie, I see you coming in. As I was saying, with our very special guest, David, just before we came on air, we are putting this one out on YouTube because I think it's as safe as you can be in YouTube and over in the Facebooks. But welcome if you're watching an Odyssey, uh, Getter, Rumble, everywhere else, all the other platforms. You're very welcome, and thanks very much for coming along on what is, for me anyway, it is quite a cold Monday evening. The global boiling is really kicking in. I can tell you. You probably get icicles forming on my nose, but nonetheless, we're going to carry on. So thanks very much for being here. And as I said, we've got an action-packed agenda tonight. So I'll not waffle as much as I normally do, so save you that. And what we'll do instead to start with is we will have a word from our sponsor, without whom none of this really would be possible. That's Quantum Hypno, and this is Sarah Jane's latest ad.
Quantum Hypno is a transformative approach that connects with the superconscious through the power of hypnosis. I take the time to get to know you and create a relaxed setting where you can share your life story. There's no rush or time pressure involved. During the hypnosis session, you'll experience a natural and profound connection with the superconscious, accessing healing, wisdom, and the answers that you've been seeking throughout your life. Envision the ability to travel through time and space, recovering lost knowledge and exploring the universe. This life-changing work has already helped thousands of people dealing with addictions, trauma, or a sense of being lost, enabling them to move forward in the right direction. I've worked with people from all walks of life. So what are you waiting for?
Yeah, there you go, Quantum Hypno. I do like the bit where she says, I've worked with people from all walks of life. That's a joke, by the way, just FYI, when you see the alien there. But anyway, Sarah Jane, do visit Quantum Hypno and support her. Right, and don't forget, we also support our startup business here in the UK, Just Stop T-shirts as well. Just Stop, give them a click as well. One of the things that, and I'm sure our next guest understands this, is the last couple of years, from 2020, small British business have been crushed under the jackboot of all kinds of authoritarianism from government, So I kind of feel an obligation. If we can support small companies, well, maybe that's just a good thing. And we're doing that just as a goodwill gesture. So that's them as well. Right. Here's the news I want to get to you about. I've been promising even that following our December event in London, we would have a follow-up and what will be a series of events. And I can pleased to tell you that event is now confirmed. It's done, dusted, and we're going to bring it up. It's happening with our special guests, Calvin Robinson and Lawrence Fox. And that's going to be in London on the 1st of March. Hold the line, challenge the narrative. I'm sure you're familiar with Calvin and Robbins and Lawrence. You don't need me to tell you much about them. Suffice to say that, as you know, they were both cancelled last year. They were cancelled in 2023 by the home of free speech, GB News. I want to talk about where is free speech in this age of censorship, So we're going to have a great night with Calvin and Lawrence. Tickets are now available if you want to go and click. They are available over on my site. I'll be putting up social media with links as well, so you can come along and hopefully you'll find it. There you go. Just click buy tickets, and you can come along and spend a night with Calvin, Lawrence, Peter McElvenna, and myself. So as I say, I hope you'll be able to make it. The last one we did in December, the church. Yeah, look upon it. We're entering spring, and hopefully I'm sure this will be a great night, actually. And I think, as I said, both these guys have an awful lot of interesting things to say, and they've gone through a lot of stuff together as well. Sometimes I think the way you validate the authenticity of someone. In fact, actually, I must bring this up with our guest in a second. Is the more cancelled people are, right? The more cancelled you are, probably the more you the more genuine you are, and the more that the things that you're saying are probably true. So anyway, that's the event. Do make sure you click on it. We'll remind you at the end of the stream as well. All the links are there on davidvance.net. That's it. Right. He sat there very diligently in the background whilst I did the PR, but I'm not going to hold you back anymore. Our special guest tonight, he was back on there not that long ago, and he was so well received that I'm absolutely delighted that he's agreed to come back to start 2024 with us here on the platform. So without any further ado, may I welcome Mr. David Scott.
David. Hello. It's lovely to be with you.
Thanks. David, just out of interest, before we get going, I was just saying about Lawrence and Calvin. They were both cancelled in 2023. And I don't know about you, but I kind of feel that the more truth speakers are punished, the more authentic they probably are, because they don't punish the people that go with the party line, but the people that sort of dissent, they're the ones that get crushed. And I speak from personal experience. Well, would you go along with that? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, during 2023, I went to the Edinburgh Fringe and watched a comedy show in the street outside the Scottish Parliament with Graham Linehan, who had been cancelled because he's Graham Linehan, right? He's been cancelled because he has views which are deemed unacceptable by some. I mean, literally Hitler, literally the most vile views imaginable. And those views are, of course, views which were normal and mainstream until 10 minutes ago. The views that men and women are different, and there should be accommodation and protection for women-only spaces. And this is only right and proper. And it's defined by biology, not how you feel.
Yes.
And for this reason, he was... essentially, he was removed from being able to conduct his business. He was totally excluded from writing comedy, which had been massively successful at. I mean, he was the foremost writer of my generation, the last generation, with IT Crowd and Father Ted and all of it.
Yeah,
and to keep his hand in at comedy, he decided to go on the stand-up circuit, which is not his business.
No,
right? It's not what he does, but it was something, and he could interact with an audience, and they wouldn't even give him that. So we all stood in the pavement and we watched the show there. So it's very horrendous. It's very censorious. But the point you make is an excellent one, because there are many people who will claim to be speaking authentically and are not. There's a lot of deception in this world. And one of the things that doesn't count for much is the labels people put on, right? They can say, I'm conservative, I'm Christian, whatever the label is, that doesn't really count for much, because there's many people who wear those labels who are entirely deceptive and working against the interests they claim to uphold. So how do you spot someone who's authentic? Well, if they say something and they suffer for it and they continue to say it, then at least you know that they are on the level. They mean it. They're being truthful as best they can. And they're not being deceptive, because there's nothing in it for them. There's only pain and suffering. So you get people like Graham Linehan, people like Katie Hopkins, right, who is increasingly a national treasure. I mean, I think we should recognize this, as indeed Graham Linehan is. Who are now being excluded and being shunned and are not buckling. And God bless them for not folding. So when you see that, I'm now at a point where if someone's cancelled, I'll turn up. I don't care what they think or believe. If they're being cancelled and shut down, I'll turn up to support them. Right? I might disagree with every word. I honestly don't care. They shouldn't be excluded from civil society for simply thinking things that some other people don't agree with.
That's absolutely right. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Like Katie, for example, and Graham. I met Graham last year, Graham Linehan, and a really nice guy. I mean, a very self-effacing guy as well, David. Despite his massive success in those programs that he created, those series that he created, the comedy stuff, I found him to be really down to earth and absolutely heart in the right place. And then, as you say, he had to do that. I remember that the Edinburgh one, actually. I remember following it because, again, they cancelled the venue, didn't they?
Twice. They cancelled the venue, and the replacement venue also cancelled. Now, this is some of the nonsense we get to, because I had a ticket, right? I bought a ticket to go and see him and Dominic Frisby and a good friend of your show, William. Is it something William? Something? A comedian.
Alistair Williams, yeah.
Alistair Williams. Alistair Williams was there as well. Right?
Yeah.
So this was from my point of view, an excellent night of comedy. So I bought a ticket.
Yeah.
And then I got an email to say we've been cancelled, but we're going to get a replacement venue, but we're not going to announce it because it'll get cancelled. We're just going to send an hour before the show. We're going to send you an email to tell you where the venue is. So that's the nonsense that you had to go through. And even then they got cancelled the second time. So we ended up outside in the street. And one other thing about Graham Linehan, I want to point out, another thing that you can watch for. Graham Linehan came from the opposite side of the spectrum. He was a left-winger, mainstream left opinion, right? He wasn't a conservative. He was someone who I perhaps wouldn't agree with politically all that very much originally. And he was on the opposite side of quite a few arguments. So you went after Count Dankula, right? And he took the opposite from Count Dankula. Now, Count Dankula made a joke. Some people liked it, some people didn't, but it was a joke. And he got convicted by the Scottish court system to their eternal shame for telling a joke. And this is obviously a very bad thing for not only comedy, but free speech in Scotland. And Count Dankula, again, bless him, stood up and didn't buckle. And the amount of pressure that the court system, the legal system applies to people, because it grinds on and on month after month, it destroys people. I've seen and a large number of people vote, say they're guilty to things they haven't done, really just to make it stop. And Count Dankula didn't buckle, and he said, if you find me, I'm not paying it, I'm going to jail. I'm not giving in to this. So he stood on principle, and that's rare. Now, Graham Linehan was on the opposite side. And of course, Graham Linehan also had jokes about Nazis in Father Ted. So this was an obvious point of comparison. Yeah. So he was very much attacking Dankula for some years. And then once it all turned on him, right, and he saw what it was really like being on the other side of the fence, he did what so few people will do. He changed and he apologized. And he reached out to Dankula and said sorry. And that's also a thing that's so rare, that does set him aside as someone who's worth supporting, because he's a decent guy.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. Well, listen, I'll tell you what, you mentioned Edinburgh there. So I know we're talking about we've got lots of things to get through, but okay, we're going to reprise the last time, because I always think, David, when it comes to Clown World, Scotland is leading the charge, like absolute global player. And you told me just before we came on, I thought I'd heard intense stupidity coming from our good friends in the SNP, and of course the glorious leader Humza. But I believe, David, there's been a couple of, and we're 15 days into the new year, but I think Humza's already showing some sterling initiatives.
Well, it really is like a comedy show. Back in the days when the BBC was funny, they had a thing called Chewing the Fat on BBC Scotland, and they had spoof court reports from Kirkcaldy Sheriff Court, right? And they were genuinely funny. Yeah. This could be one, but isn't. This one's actually true. This actually happened. So Humza Yousaf, First Minister of Scotland, some would argue of Gaza, but officially First Minister of Scotland. Yeah. His wife, who's a Dundee council for the SNP, is also a drugs advisor to the SNP and Scottish Government on the problem of drugs, which is a huge problem in Scotland. Well, it transpires that his brother-in-law is not exactly helping, because he's just appeared in Dundee Sheriff Court, charged with distributing £6,000 worth of heroin. So yeah, Humza's brother-in-law is up on a drugs charge, and he really couldn't make it up. And the memes are writing themselves, because Humza's great moment was when he stood up in Parliament and did a speech about all the things which were white, which he detested, all the people who were white,
Yes.
that he detested, and what a bad world it is because there's so many things that are white. So the meme I've got here in front of me, the meme says, "Gear my brother-in-law punts white." So I don't know if that's the end of a political career, but it feels like it might be close.
It's not looking good. And as I was saying to you, David, the other clown world thing that I picked up on, I saw it today, but I saw it a couple of days previous, was that Humza's wife, as you say, is a councillor in Dundee. And I seen this thing earlier, which was saying that apparently in Dundee, David, they've put up some interreactive lampposts that you can discuss climate change with. It's 27. Apparently, they got 27,000 from the government to have talking lampposts in which we can engage in climate change. And this is all under the umbrella of brand Humza. And David, is it any surprising when you get stories like this, that big opinion poll that we saw come out at the weekend, the electoral sort of the YouGov, the mega poll that they conducted, is suggesting that in Scotland this year, but assuming that we have the election by the end of the year, which I think is a certainty, the SNP will lose about half their seats. Tell us how you react to that, and what do you think that will mean for Scotland in the time ahead?
Well, it's good. It's ending the independence debate, which has been dragging on now since about 2012. Right, so we've had over a decade of it just being the only thing that's been talked about in the political realm, which has not been to anyone's benefit. So many mistakes are being made, so many problems are not. For example, the drugs problem, it's just getting worse and worse. If you go back 20 years, the drugs problem in Scotland and the drugs problem in England were of a similar size, and now it's something like 3 times larger in Scotland. It's appalling. And no one's doing anything. The point you made, the Scottish Daily Express, Humza's wife, Nadia Kala, urges Dundonians to talk to lampposts and bus shelters about climate change. This is real.
It's real. It honestly, God, it's real. It is real. It sort of leaked out there a bit. Naturally, it's probably not given a lot of prominence, but apparently they have some. I don't know how they do. I've never heard of an interreactive lamppost. I've seen dogs interact with lampposts, but in a different form, David. But I've never understood that. Never known how you can go up to the lamppost. Presumably, they must have some tech in it, and you can.
We've got a tweet. Here's a tweet from Dundee City Council. Following seasonal updates to the Hello Lamppost platform, members of the public are being encouraged to start up a conversation with lampposts, bus shelters and fences in Dundee about the climate and nature emergency.
Yes.
I'm sorry. This is getting too...
It's almost too much. It's like...
It's too bizarre.
Yeah. But that's legit then. That's legit, and that's coming from the council. They've got
that's a council tweet. Yeah.
In a country, as you said, and on a serious note, like yes, David, the drugs problem in Scotland seems to have just sort of gone massive. And at the same time, your education system's through the floor. Your health services, and we'll talk about the health service shortly, is through the floor as well. Law and order. You would have thought there were more pressing matters than having interreactive lampposts that you can discuss climate change and global warming with. But apparently that's not where the SNP leadership is. So to go back to my question, if they lose half their seats, well, where do you reckon they'll lose half the seats? Will that all be outside of Glasgow and, I don't know, Dundee or wherever? And what will it mean for the SNP?
Well, just so people understand, that the situation in Scotland is very strange, because first past the post-election and there's 4 main parties, which means it's very random. So you get a little bit of swing, you get a whole batch of seats, or you lose a whole seats. And you've also got the tactical voting aspect of this, because if everyone decides that one of the four parties has to be gotten rid of, they all gang up on that one and they lose disproportionately. The Conservatives have suffered from this in the past. So you've got a Labour Party that's resurgent for no very good reason that I can tell, other than everyone else is rubbish.
Yeah, that's right.
And so they're coming up. And you've got a situation where almost anything could happen, from a sort of minor loss of a few seats to an almost complete wipeout. And no one really knows how it's going to go. There's an awful lot of people who are very, very tired of the SNP. And there's a lot of feeling that we need a change. And this is a good chance to give them a real good hiding. So I think they might really struggle. If the Conservatives improve just a little and manage to hold on to what they've got, or maybe even gain one or two, with the Labour Party coming up as well, the SNP could find themselves squeezed and could really hit the buffers. Now, one of the other aspects of this is, of course, that Nicola Sturgeon decided that the new shiny policy on an independence referendum was there would be a mandate to break up Great Britain if they got a majority of the votes or seats, it wasn't entirely clear, at the general election. So this was to be a de facto referendum. Now, no one else is playing, but it is announced by the SNP. So if they do get thumped, that will be 2 referenda they've missed.
That's a good point.
And presumably we then need to play best of 5, I guess.
Penalty shootout maybe, but I mean, you're right, because she did say that this was, well, you know, if the British government won't give us the Indy, we will use the result of the next general election as a de facto referendum. And as you said, that was back when their lead seemed unassailable. I mean, essentially, a complete domination. And it's amazing, isn't it? In the space of 12 months, David, if we'd have been talking 12 months ago, I know there was cracks beginning to appear, but, you know, in 12 months, the SNP looked to me to be, you know, a bit of a beaten docket. And it's not because I agree with you. Labour's done like nothing. There's no reason to vote for Labour, but I think there's such a contempt in England for the Tories, and maybe in Scotland for the SNP, that just by being there, Labour pick up the votes. But Nicola, you know, she's going to be asked a lot of awkward questions then about, well, as you said, this is the second independence vote you've lost. Where do you go?
Nicola is not going to be treated kindly by Scottish nationalist historians, because they're going to look at her and they're going to think, well, this was huge missed opportunities. I mean, her lack of intellectual ability really told, because she ended up in a position where simply following the leader wasn't any good. She actually had to think. She actually had to lead, and she wasn't capable. So we had Brexit. Now, there was a golden, if you believe that Scotland's manifest destiny is to be independent from the rest of the UK. That maybe one day we can get a chance to talk about why I think that way, but it's a valid point of view. There's nothing wrong with actually seeking that, right? Yeah. And if that's your point of view, then when Brexit happened, then what should have happened is Nicola should have gone to the Conservative government and said, I've got all of these MPs. I will get you a Brexit deal through, whatever you want. But the quid pro quo is when it's all done and dusted and we've left the EU, we get a chance to have another referendum in Scotland to see if we want to stay or go. And she'd have got it, but she was too stupid and didn't do it. And then she started a campaign where she said, well, we voted to stay. So that means a small part of this political entity voted a different way, so they should have a different outcome. Now, of course, if there was ever another Scottish independence vote and they got 51% of the vote and huge swathes of Scotland voted to stay in the UK, that, of course, applies to them too. So are you going to tell the Borders, Dumfries and Galloway, Lothian, that they can't stay in the UK? I don't think so. So, I mean, everything she did was just dim. and it's now, including the Gender Recognition Reform Act, and
Yeah.
it's now coming home. It's now coming home to roost. And one of the things that came up from the SNP, they had certain tendencies that are very common in politics today. They just had them slightly worse than everybody else. They didn't do openness; they did secrecy. Right? So they didn't do proper minutes and records. It was all done on WhatsApp messages, which were deleted, and little post-it notes which were thrown away. So you couldn't FOI and find out what was being done in your name. So secrecy was one of the things. And the other thing that they had was this arrogance, right? We are in charge. We will determine. You little people, you just do what you're told. And they had this huge arrogance. And arrogance is very dangerous, because if you really are arrogant, you get sloppy, you get lazy, because you think you're better than everyone else, and then things start going horribly wrong. And that's what's happened to them. And like many Scots, I'm loving it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Gender Recognition Act, that's kind of is going to be, I mean, that was their final act, wasn't it? I mean, really. And that one went so badly wrong so quickly. And the squirming, I love that. I got to say, David, I love that whole thing, because it was completely, I mean, clearly completely out of her depth. And I don't know who she listens to, but clearly she wasn't listening to the right people, if anyone. And so that was the final act before the fall, wasn't it? The terrible excuses and the perambulating she was trying to do. It was just cringe.
It was really dreadful and extremely funny, because there was all of these people asking questions like, is Isla Bryson a man or a woman? Yeah, and there was no answer. And they go, well, is the Tadger not a clue? And there was still no answer. And this was broadcast live on television. And I mean, to be fair to Nicola Sturgeon, right, 80% of the entire Scottish political establishment couldn't answer that question. Right? The head of the Scottish Liberal Democrats said he wasn't qualified to say whether this male rapist was a man or a woman. Yeah. And of course, do you remember the head of the Labour Party? He was saying, well, it can be either, the question was, can a woman have a penis? Yeah. And he was prevaricating about the bush, and he got criticised for this. And then he said, he thought this actually improved it. He came and he said 99% of women don't have penises. And he thought somebody in the Labour Party thought that was a good move. Right? These people are not clever, and this is the sort of thing that we've seen in the SNP, horribly advised, run by spin doctors and SPADs, special advisors, and just divorced from the people and not getting it, and as a result running into trouble. So what we've seen from the SNP, the car crash that has been the SNP, could easily be the Labour Party after the next general election, because the actual belief systems that these two organizations hold are almost identical. Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree with you. I mean, we've seen Starmer sort of swivel on all of his kind of, trying to straddle areas of belief which don't make any sense. It'll be fun to watch Labour fall apart as well. But I've certainly enjoyed watching the SNP fall apart. It's been one of the highlights. That was one of my highlights of 2023. And that's before we get near camper vans and EV vehicles and certain other things, shenanigans that were going on as well. As always happens, actually, David, in the final days of the regime, don't you think those are the things that then, you see falling down? All of a sudden, all this, alleged corruption just materializes. And it's always been there. It's just, it materializes. Yeah, the other bit that's come literally out of the closet in the last week or so is it transpired that when the Stone of Destiny was stolen from Westminster Abbey back in the 50s and was broken in the attempt, a small fragment of this had been kept by one of the conspirators and was then given to Alex Salmond, the then head of the SNP. Salmond denied all knowledge, and the hunt went on for where is this piece of this national relic.
Yeah.
And it transpired it was in a Tupperware container in a cupboard in SNP headquarters. And there is something deeply cringe about that. There's something that shows the complete contempt that the so-called Scottish, so-called National Party has for the nation. They just don't care.
Yep. Absolutely agree with you. Yeah. Well, anyway, David, look, we always have a good canter through affairs Scottish because, but frankly, the material writes itself. I mean, really and truly, when I hear myself talking to you about talking to lampposts, I'm thinking, really, David, where are we? But anyway, to switch a gear, so David, one of the things, obviously, as we talked about last time round, you're sort of been developing your own platforms and whatnot, and you've got, excuse me, that nice new set I see, Northern Exposure, and you've also got your Substack, digging deeper, and I have to say, everyone, I mean, if you're not subscribed to David's Substack, digging deeper, you really should, because and David, as I said to you last time, I followed you for a long time anyway, but I really enjoy well-written, considered analysis because it's just really helpful. It's just really helpful, essentially. Here's David's Twitter, by the way, as well. You can see David over there. Make sure you follow him. If you haven't, do it now, wherever you are. You will be educated. But David, I came across, the piece you put out this start of the year, I think, 2nd of January. Happy New Year from David Scott. Let's talk about eugenics and the NHS. And it's it's a really serious and important discussion, I think, to have. And you kind of constructed it very well. I mean, just to put my cards on the table, I have been a long time arch critic of the NHS. And I used to delight in calling it the National Death Service. And this is even before COVID, before we saw it unleash its full horrific potential on our fellow citizens, But in your article, I mean, can you just kind of talk the audience through the key elements of as you construct the argument regarding, because eugenics and the NHS, well, that's a big combo. Talk us through it.
So the eugenics as an idea started in England. It started with Galton, who was related to Charles Darwin, and it came from Darwinian ideas. But early on, it crossed the pond to America, and it really took off in America. So that America and Cold Springs Harbor they had a lab there, and for decades, particularly through the 20s and 30s, America was the world leader in eugenics, so-called science. And they sterilized many people they considered defective human beings and unworthy of reproducing. And they introduced massive eugenics laws in places like Mississippi. And these were all about getting more from the fit, more children from the fit, less from the unfit. And the unfit were the people who were different or black or poor or you name it. Irish. I mean, it doesn't matter what you happen to be. If somebody looked down on you, you were not destined to reproduce. And they did things such as they would go to country fairs and take these ideas, and they'd have competitions. And they'd run the competitions through the churches to try and get engagement, because people trusted their pastors. So they tried to get these new and entirely anti-biblical ideas into the public domain through the churches by out and out bribery. So I knew that story. And if you're interested in that story, the book is called War Against the Weak. I've got a reference to it in the article. It's a fabulous book, and it covers principally America. And then there was a regime in Germany you might have heard of that took these ideas from America and applied them. So 1930s Germany and 1930s America were vying with one another to be the world leader in eugenics. And in Britain, it never got as far. It didn't get so extreme. There is unfortunately a moderation in the British people that seems to hold some of the worst excesses back. And I thought that was the story. Yeah. And then we were looking through the archives in the Mitchell Library in Glasgow on another case, and we'll maybe in another show I'll come to what the other case is. And we came across a piece from 1960, right, by a Colonel R.S. Weir, Lanarkshire County Councillor and President of the Scottish Association of Executive Councils of the National Health Service. So a top man. And he said, quote, "Much has been said of the deterioration of our blood stock by the preservation of the unfit and undesirables." And people listening, that's you and me.
Yeah.
The elimination would be a blessing, but education has far to go before people will consent to this. So this was the 1960s. They were talking 30 or 40 years of education before we could actually go about eliminating the undesirables. And he also said, let's put aside the question of cost and think of the misery, the ever-present burden in the home, blighted by the child moron or the senile defective.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then he said, I told him, when there comes a time in life when the memory is gone and friends are gone, the will to live is gone, then the doctor helps to speed the soul into eternity. To my mind, it's this, the head of the NHS, does no harm. I see people in mental hospitals and old people's homes, and it's a stage in life where they'd be happier dead than alive. Notice that's his opinion. It's not even theirs. He's making that for them. So that was being pushed in 1960s Scotland, and I was shocked because I thought after the Second World War and all the information had come out about the Nazi T4 program and euthanasia program and the death camps and the whole thing, I thought that it would be so toxic. These ideas would be so toxic. No one would go near them again. But this is not the case. So I then found that Julian Huxley, the founder of UNESCO, was also pushing exactly the same thing and doing it explicitly. And I go through that.
Yeah.
And then...
Sorry, David. I mean, you're talking about that's only 15 years after the end of World War II. So
exactly so.
You know,
exactly so.
Yeah, it's incredible. I find that. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
15 years from Belsen, 15 years from when we liberated Belsen Camp to let's do it again.
Yeah, do it again. Yeah.
So, and then I quote it quite a bit. Chesterton, G.K. Chesterton. Now he was a thinker, an intellectual, a polemicist, and he was part of the push against this in the 1920s. And he wrote a book called Eugenics and Other Evils. And you can get it. You can get a free PDF. There's a link on my article to give you a free PDF. There's also an audio book that you can get on YouTube, and that's also free. All right, please look this out because the writing is wonderful, and it's a lot of it's laugh out loud funny, and he really hits them. I'll give you one quote. He says, "Most eugenicists are euphemists. I merely mean that short words startle them, whilst long words soothe them. And they are utterly incapable of translating the one into the other. However, obviously they mean the same thing. Say to them, the persuasive and even coercive powers of the citizen should enable him to make sure that the burden of longevity in the previous generation does not become disproportionate and intolerable, especially to the females. Say this to them and they will sway slightly to and fro like babies sent to sleep in cradles. Say to them, murder your mother, and they will sit up quite suddenly, yet the two sentences in cold logic are exactly the same." So this is one of the things that Chesterton hits them with, and he really is a joy to read or listen to. So
But the thing is, I mean, Chesterton was saying that, and then we went through World War II, and then we're in the 60s now, and this evil malignancy is still very much being pushed in the NHS, David.
Yeah, so we bring it forward, and I talk about many aspects of the NHS, but I then focus on one, because you've got to kind of pick one in a short article, and I focus on the treatment of Down syndrome, and the fact that it's being essentially eliminated by murder, largely by abortion. And some of the stories which were reported in mainstream press in the Times, Emma Mellor said, we must have been offered about 15 terminations. At 38 weeks, he made it really, really clear that if I changed my mind on the morning of the induction, to let them know, because it wasn't too late until the baby had started traveling down the birth canal, I can still terminate. So this is what's been said today in the NHS to eliminate Down syndrome people from our world. And it's put forward as, well, it's suffering. We're killing them because we're kind, because we're saving suffering. But of course, no one's asking them. And people who have Down syndrome, people in their families, say they're the happiest people we know.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and this was also one of the authors in the Times, Dominic Lawson, whose daughter has Downs. So he was writing about this. He said, Claire Rayner complained that he had essentially not aborted his daughter, and she was going to be a burden and have a miserable life. And he said, so much for Rayner's forecast of misery. My daughter, or indeed the repeated fallacy that people suffer from Down syndrome, an expression designed to reassure people that termination is a caring option. Because he talks about his daughter and he says he's thoughtful, kind, highly articulate, hilariously funny, especially as a mimic, and above all filled with a joy de vivre that lifts the spirit of all who meet her. And this is a very consistent pattern. And so this is what we get, is we get an unspoken eugenics, because no one's actually stood up and said, we're going to eliminate Down syndrome because we're just going to kill all these people. But that's what's happening.
That's the natural.
Right? It's creeping, it's unannounced, it's unspoken. It is a policy, it's just a policy that dare not speak its name. And it cannot speak its name because the people would recognize it for what it is. The people would say that's Action T4, that's Nazi, that's wrong, we must not do this. So as long as it's kept reasonably quiet, it's happening, and the pressures have been brought to bear one family at a time, and no one's talking about it. And I think we should talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose someone in the NHS would probably look upon this as well. We've only got finite resource. I mean, we can't treat everybody. So, if that means a little bit of, it is kind of like selective eugenics. I mean, but then, we had all the whole business about the Liverpool pathway of care. I mean, care is another euphemism in the NHS, isn't it? Care seems to be a euphemism for, for not caring, for, potentially, getting rid of it. It's so I remember going on about that, David, years ago, and that seemed pretty horrific as well, because I can never understand, why is the NHS not focused on life and supporting life? It seems to be unnaturally obsessed with death and creating death and ending life.
Well, this is an area where the medical profession as a whole needs to take a look at itself, because I actually think the medical profession will never find any sort of ethical basis for its conduct until it comes out against abortion and says to the politicians, well, you do it because we're not doing that. The idea that killing, and it's now, 9 million babies in Britain, right, since they made this legal, killing hundreds of thousands of babies a year is somehow therapeutic, is vile, and it's changed the medical profession, because there was a point where whatever a patient presented with, the first response of the medical doctor would be, how can we save the life of this person?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, the response is much more uncertain. Is the response sometimes, should we save the life of this person? And that's not a question that is in their pay grade. That's way above their pay grade. They should not be asking that question, but increasingly they are. And of course, you realize where this goes, right? Because you've got Canada showing us the way with MAID, medical assistance in dying, right? Which came in, and you had to be, terminal and have a terminal diagnosis initially. And then, no, you didn't have to have any definite point where you were going to die that was known. You didn't have to have anything really wrong with you. And then it became, well, you could simply be depressed. And then we've started seeing people going for, I've got a gammy leg. I need a stair lift. Well, we don't have any money to give you a stair lift, but we can give you medical assistance in dying.
Yep.
Right. I mean, that actually happened in Canada.
Yep. Yeah, but just on that, you're dead right. I mean, the authorities in Canada, their enthusiasm for assisted suicide is unbelievable, as you say. I mean, I would hesitate to go to a doctor if I was sneezing, lest they turned around to me and said, "Well, actually, David, have you considered killing yourself?" But at another level, like I find it very dark. I don't know about you, that there's a darkness, especially Canada, but I know it can and it will probably happen elsewhere as well. That I see as even above and beyond the medical authorities. It's a love of ending life, a love of death, and I think that's got. My own personal view, it's got a spiritual. There is another dimension to it because it's horrific. Like, we can laugh at it, and sometimes to keep your sanity, David, you do have to laugh. But you gotta. I mean, I see some of the comments coming in here. It really is. I just think it's so dark, so evil that they can do this, and then present it as we're just caring. We're very caring. Just kill yourself.
Dark for sure. And you're right, yes, it's a spiritual battle, and it is life versus death, because ultimately Satan's view is that he hates mankind because we're made in the image of God, and therefore we've got to go, right? All of us, and anyone who thinks that they're immune, right? I don't care what LBG, whatever number of initials or funny symbols you've got after your name, it will come for you too.
Yeah.
It wants us dead, all of us.
Yeah. Well,
and so it's a death cult, and you see little signs of that in the medical profession. Goodness, in the politics of the age, in the view that what was the Nazis called it? Life unworthy of life, and useless eaters. All of these things, which when I was younger, were viewed as obvious examples of the depravity and evil of the Nazi regime, are, with only a few words changed, now part of the West, part of the Anglo-Saxon world, part of us. And we've got to stand up. We've got to say no. And particularly people in these professions, where are the Christian doctors standing outside the hospital saying, "This is evil, we're not doing it"? They're not there.
No.
Why are they not there?
I think because some of them are petrified. That's why. Some of them know, and we saw this during COVID times as well, that particularly we're talking about the NHS. I mean, it's such it's so controlled. It operates in fear. I had friends and senior doctors working in A&E and NHS back in 2020 as well, and they were scared senseless. They knew what was going on. They knew it was wrong. If they spoke up, and let's say they were in their mid-50s, and the pension age is not that many years ahead, do you rock the ship? Well, your Christian value should be, yeah, you should, but that sometimes there's conflicts, you know, and actually, David, the other thing is, like, you know, you talk about Canada, their approach, but look at what they were doing in the in March, April of 2020 across the UK. I mean, our elderly were being culled. There's no other word for it, with,
There's no
you
other
know,
word for it.
midazolam, morphine, and all the rest of it, and that was within a health care system. Healthcare system.
Yeah, my mother was a nurse in the 40s, and she said in the 1970s, she told me that, you know, that they're putting people down. And I remember some of my relatives saying, "No, you can't say that. That's not true." Still, they're going into hospital. She was seeing some of her elderly friends. They're going into hospital. There's not much wrong with them. They're drugged and they sleep away. They're putting them down. And that was her view. And that was the 1970s. So it's been going on for a long time. It's just been getting much more obvious and severe. The need to fight back and push back against this is huge. And people don't know how. Maybe one of these conversations, David, we should have a really in-depth look at how you fight back. Because a lot of the times, it's the fear works with innuendo. The fear works with suggestion, right? The fear works with things that are not quite said. And if called out, it's amazing how much they run.
And to back off. Yeah.
And it does, for the fear to work, it depends on you buying into being frightened. And if you're not frightened and you know how to fight back against the system, I maintain it's surprising how much can be done by just a few individuals. Particularly now we've got the internet, because information is everywhere. And you can do a huge amount. Remember, the named person scheme in Scotland was taken down by a small grassroots campaign based on the research by two women. Right, who were looking into what the government were actually doing and how they were communicating with their people and what they were telling their people to do, and then they were basically showing that to the public. And the simple move of removing the screen and letting the public see what the government was actually up to, that was enough. That killed it.
Yeah, and David, I actually think this is the way forward. I don't have any confidence whatsoever in any political party. I don't have much confidence in politics per se. Once you start to understand what's behind the mask, you know, who would? But when you have people at local level come together and form these kind of groups and take on these maybe single issue things, the impact they can have is enormous. As you say, with that instance you had in Scotland with the named persons, you know, that whole business.
The post office scandal, which is everywhere now, that was one small specialist magazine that wouldn't let it go. They kept digging, and eventually they've won. It's astonishing what can be done. You need to do the hard intellectual yards. You need to get into the weeds of things. You need to understand what all the words mean. You need to follow every lead. And if you do that, it's amazing what happens. And one of the other things is the people who work for the government aren't doing that. They're not following every lead. They don't know. So you end up being much better qualified than they are. And as a result, winning.
Well, that again was so obvious, wasn't it, during the from 2020 to 2020, well, to now, I suppose, really, when we see the lack of knowledge that I mean, being an expert now is an oxymoron, isn't it? If you're an expert at this point in history, that means you probably haven't got a clue what you're talking about. And yet ordinary people who research things can have vast amounts of knowledge. That's what I found.
There's the next major scandal in Scotland is called the conversion ban bill, we don't have time to go into it now, but there's an expert panel there, and suddenly the Scottish government's been very shy about revealing who is on their expert panel, but we know, and it's quite a shocking group.
Yeah.
And when you see what's actually steering policy, you can see why the policy is so bad. Digging into that as well, digging into the who as well as the why is vitally important. But the idea that you can win, people think the government's got them. People think, though, they're big, we're small, they always win, the game's fixed. No, the game's fixed, but that means they get sloppy, right? And they're not that good. And there's a lot of very stupid people who work for the government, and they will help you, and they won't mean to. And sometimes it's surprisingly high level as well. If you start and you do the hard intellectual yards, you will find things that you can make a difference with. And essentially, the other thing to remember is if you can think of it, if you can imagine it, it's almost certain that the government is up to it. So just be curious. And when you start seeing things that don't look right, keep digging. Get some people involved, and also enjoy it, because it's an absolute hoot. Once you start really getting into this, it's phenomenally funny, because you find out all of these tricks of trying to pull, and you call them on it, and you see them backtracking, and it can really get extremely entertaining. And because of that, people's morale keeps up, people keep going, and you become a threat to the system. You become very difficult to handle. It's a joyful thing to do.
I mean, they're all essentially the Wizard of Oz. They're the guy behind the curtain, aren't they? And when you pull the curtain back, it's laughable what you see. Basically, you're right. The facade. The thing is, they put on this great facade, this all-knowing, all-pervasive facade, and then if you keep going at them, it crumbles, because they're not high quality people. They're high quality actors maybe, but they're not high quality thinkers. And they don't really, half the time, I reckon they don't know what they don't really understand what they're saying. And for definite in the last few years, I think across a lot of disciplines, we saw that, David.
Yeah, it's falling backwards. I mean, you're right about the tag expert has now become one that no one would want. And I remember about March, April time in 2021, I called it that we've won over COVID. Right? It's got a long way to run yet, but we've won, because we've won the arguments, and they don't have anything, and they have lost the intellectual argument, and the rest is just a matter of time. Right? And that proved to be true. It's the intellectual argument that actually defined it. Right? The intellectual argument over the risks, over benefits and risks of the vaccine, over all of this. That was determined on data, on statistics, and that meant that what was happening had to change. It took them a little while to get round to admitting it, and they're still not fully admitted it, but the intellectual argument was won, and the result of that is they had to change.
No, so which is I think why, David, in your Substack, sort of digging deeper, it is sort of in that area where you're going in to a lot of detail. And as I say, we've got it up on the screen here. And as I said, please make sure you subscribe to David's work over there. Because David, I mean, I think we're probably aligned in this one. Knowledge is power. The more information we have, the more effective we can be, I feel. And obviously the mainstream media doesn't give us that knowledge, and that's why people like yourself, have such an important role to play in providing some of getting that stuff out there. And
there's a lot of excellent material on Substack. I've been very impressed with it as a platform. So I'm only on there now, I think 2 weeks, but it's been excellent. The audience has been very good, very supportive and large. And I published another one today called "Coming Up the Clyde in a Banana Boat."
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Right. Which is all about Scottish Committee on Homeless Children. And there's more on this sort of general subject to come shortly as well. So it's all very interesting stuff, and it's coming out of research, and it's coming out of because it's looking slightly historically. You can see the scope of what the state was doing, and then compare it to what they're doing now, and realize it's the same thing. It's simply being rebranded.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you know, the old maxim: the more things change, the more they stay the same. And I think, you know, that's how it is. The more, certainly as I've grown older and the more information I get, the more I do come to the conclusion, yeah, it's all the same. It's just the language changes around it, and the faces change, but ultimately it all stays the same. David, we've reached the end of our time. Again, we've shot by a few things we didn't get to chat about, but never mind. We'll save that for the next time, right? But David, on behalf of everybody and all the streams who have been watching this one, and I've seen some really nice comments, thank you so much for being with us and giving us your time on this mid-January Monday evening. There's David again over on the different platforms. Do make sure that you subscribe to David, follow his work, follow his Substack, support David. And David, I'll look forward to having you back, and we can get maybe we'll have more talking lampposts or other inanimate objects in Scotland by that point. But for now, David, sorry. Yeah.
No, there may be more crazy from Scotland. This is a distinct possibility.
All right. It never ceases to amaze me. I never cease to be amazed. Listen, David, thank you very much, folks. Just before we go, just a final word. Don't forget the tickets for our London event are now on sale. So go across, click, and you can get yourself signed up for the event. Lawrence and Calvin, myself and Peter will be there, so hopefully you'll find it a good night, a Friday night in London. Just make sure you wear your body armor, you know, or whatever else you need to your necessary London fashion choices. But anyway, those who were here with us in December realize it actually was a good night's chat, and this will be an equally good night. So listen, from David Scott and myself, that's it for tonight. Thanks for being with us. I'm doing a pre-record tomorrow night with my friend Alana Mercer, and we're going to be discussing Alana. I'm sure you know Alana's background, being Jewish and all of that. We're going to be discussing her take on the whole Gaza-Israel stuff, and we'll push that out later on in the week. Can't remember, maybe Wednesday or Thursday we'll put that out. I think you'll find that quite provocative. But anyway, look, from the two Davids, this is a bit like the two Ronnies, isn't it really? It's good night from me.
It's good night from him.
Good night, everyone. See you.